the concept of Zionism, ironically, this nationalism, besides the fact that it's contradictory to what everything Judaism is all about, and the fathers of the people's whole goal is to estrange people from God, but one of the commandments of the Torah, given by King Solomon, a prophecy of King Solomon, is that we're expressly forbidden, since the destruction of the temple, we were put under oath by God, under 3 oaths, not to return en masse to the land of Israel, to the Holy Land, not to rebel against any nation. We have to be loyal citizens in every country residing, and not to attempt to end exile. An express command of God, because God foresaw that there will be people who will be impatient with exile and say, I don't see God watching me and this and that, and we have to end it. And so God warned us, and this was accepted for 2,000 years, that even if the land would be a vacant land, uninhabited, it would have been a desolate land, a desert, and we would have the capability of moving there and creating our own state with the blessings of all the nations, of all the people who were living there. We are forbidden to do so, because that is the decree of exile. Like a parable would be if a father has a son who's very bad, and he keeps on warning him, you're doing bad things, I'm going to take you, I'm going to put you in the corner, and you're going to have to stand there for 15 minutes. And the son ignores him and keeps on doing what he's doing. Finally, the father takes him and he stands in the corner. And the son says after 5 minutes he's itching and scratching. He's not going to stand in the corner. So he comes and he says, Daddy, I love you. I love you. I'm finished. I'm not going to be bad. He said, I warned you 10 times. I gave you every opportunity. You must stand there 15 minutes. No, I'm not standing there. I love you. I'm returning and everything's fine. So the father gets even more angry at him. The concept of exile is, for us, as the rabbis try to explain it, it's a bitter medicine, but it's a medicine. God took us out of the land and told us that we have to remain and repent, and the reason of the exile is to break our haughtiness. And eventually we say God is the most compassionate. God, with his compassion, when he sees the time is right and fit, that he himself will end exile in a snap, in the blink of an eye. He's waiting for the opportunity to stop. We give another example. It says that if a child cries at night, whoever has children knows what this means. The child has an earache, and he cries, and he's yelling and crying, and it hurts the mother and the father more than the child. You can feel it. It rips through the heart when you hear this child crying. You don't know what to do. You're desperate for that child. God's compassion for the suffering of his children, I'm not talking about any human being, and for the Jewish children is greater than our own feelings for ourselves. When God feels the time is right, he will end this exile. But to do so prematurely is rebellion, is flying in the face of the command of God, and we will warn that it will bring God to the catastrophe if we breach these oaths. So this concept of going and creating our own nationalism, our own land, is not only, it's nationalism, and it's nothing, it's antithetical to Judaism, it's contradictory, it's a rebellion against God and his commandments. And it just becomes compounded thousandfold because the land of Palestine that they decided to go to their sorrow or whatever, the Zionists, had a practical problem. It was inhabited. It wasn't an empty land. So they decided they have to go to Palestine to get support from the Jews, and to get support from the non-Jews to get their money. And they had a problem, technical problem. There were people living there. In fact, the vast majority of people living in that land were Palestinian people. So of course, it was prior to the internet. There was barely telephones. So they came along with this concept that they said it was a mantra. It was a land without a people for a people without a land. And it sold very well on college campuses. They had different students who were able to carry along their message, and nobody was there to question them. They were very well connected in high government offices. They were very well connected, and they had many of the students. They were Muslim students. Nobody was there to disagree with them. So they were able to sell this lie, this blatant lie, that it was a land without people. Yes, there were a few nomads. There were people running around, these nomads, these cannibals, or whatever you want to call them, these third world people running around who hated Jews. Terribly, they hated Jews. And so they're just vicious people who have an ingrained hate for Jews because they're Jews. And these people are our problem, but you have to understand, they're just not to be reckoned with. So basically, the concept of Zionism is a rebellion against God in many facets, in every facet that it exists. it's nationalism, it's a rebellion against God because we're not allowed to have a state, and we're not allowed to, in the Torah, the basics of Torah is our covenant to God that it says in the Torah, you have to emulate God. Just as God is compassionate, you have to be compassionate. The whole concept of the Torah is that we should be subservient and try to emulate God. Rabbi Yisroel Hirsch, one of the people brought in here, the head of German Jewry around 200 years ago, stated that God is perfect. And in his decree of exile, he had two purposes. One, to break our haughtiness. And the second issue is that we should be spread amongst the nations, and we're practicing our Judaism, which should be a light unto the nations. So it accomplishes many issues when we spread amongst people. That wouldn't be so if we would be practicing Judaism properly. So that is the issue about being spread. And then he writes that he tries to go through force up to the land, is against the Torah and so forth. It's brought down in the writings, and many of Rabbi Yisroel Hirsch, the head of German Jewry, modern day orthodoxy, writes against Zionism, clearly, very strongly against Zionism. So Zionism flies in the face of all this. Zionism is therefore, it's a simple act, Flyer said, it's a rebellion against the Almighty. I really should be discussing the issue of Palestine, the issue of the Palestinian people, their suffering. I mean, because that's obviously something which is terrible, just what happened in Gaza. It's over 60 years, it's 100 years of suffering of a people with just words, there's no words to describe the physical, the mental anguish, the people who, just now there was over 5,000 people who were maimed and injured and maimed, and people after a while forget all that, but they live off their lives with one eye, with internal damage, mentally disturbed. We have people walking around, them and of course the families, the parents, their brothers and sisters, and for the whole life they're suffering. And this is just one step in this long chain, one link in a chain of sorrow, of disaster, of nakba that's existing since this concept of Zionism. So I should be spending here as a Jewish person responsible to speak up, being that my name is being used, our identity is being used for this. I should be speaking out my heart, crying about what is happening to the Palestinian people. But we chose that we're going to speak about the concept of Zionism, that you should understand, so that when the Zionists walk out and they'll say, oh, these are just, anti-Semites, because they don't know the truth, they didn't hear the other side of the coin. We want to give you the other side of the coin. We want to go to undermine, to show you the root of what this is, that the whole root of this movement of Zionism, that the ideology is born and bred on one thing, blasphemy, a mutiny against God, totally a rebellion against God. It's built on concepts of heresy, and therefore it doesn't have a Jewish base to stand on. So everything else that they're building on, that they're trying to talk about, that the Palestinians are anti-Semitic, and we have a right to the land because of our Jewish heritage, and because God gave it to us, all these things are false, patently false. And then obviously following from there that what they're doing to the Palestinian people, they're stealing their land. If they don't have a right to that land, they're stealing the land from the Palestinian people. The concept that the Arab people hated us is again one of the tragedies of Zionism. We've had the Crusades, we've had the Spanish Inquisition, decree of the years, and we have many decrees and Jewish people suffering in Christian lands. We have, throughout history, and even now by World War II, the Muslim lands happen to be a safe haven, a land that opened its doors for the Jewish people. I'm not saying that throughout history that there were never any pogroms, that there were never any bumps in the road amongst the Muslim countries for the Jewish people. But we are always able to exist, and a lot of times it was in the most gracious way. And the Jewish people had thriving Jewish communities prior to any United Nations or human rights groups. There was no like somebody standing there with guns from the UN groups to protect us. No. These were places. I was in Yemen myself 20 years ago, there was communities in the back hills where people carried guns, children carried guns. They had tribal wars, and the Jewish people were able to thrive and live there. Why were we able to live amongst the Arab and Muslim people? Because their basic instincts and the basic teachings is hospitality and friendship. And we're very close now in the ways that we all believe in one God and we serve God. And similarly. So this is the Judaism was always existing here. And then all of a sudden to come and say that these people are the ones who detest us, and it's because of ingrained hate, is the most audacious chutzpah, nerve to come along and say that in the Christian lands, that's our good friends, and the Arab lands, those are our enemies. I mean, you can sell, better sell the Brooklyn Bridge, to people, and yet it goes across, because that's the works of Satan. And so instead, one of the requirements of Judaism is to repay good with good. We're required to be grateful and show our gratefulness. And here we're having the Palestinian people. I have my colleagues who are in the 70s and the 80s, and they lived in Palestine. They lived in Jerusalem together, door by door with their neighbors. We have writings from Zionist papers that admit that in Jerusalem, Post I have here that in Yemen, they wrote a report. They keep on trying to extract the little bit of Judaism that's left in Yemen. And every Arab land, that's what they were up to. But now, if they extracted almost all the Jews from Yemen, they turned around and the reporter went back there with one of the Jews from Yemen who was living in Jerusalem, in Palestine, and went back to Yemen. And he went and one of the Yemenite Arabs went and kissed him. He said, "My brother." So the reporter asked him, and I have this, it's a Jerusalem report. I have this. He said, "How come you're calling him his brother? Your brother?" So he said, "Because when my mother didn't have milk, his mother breastfed me." And this we have more. We have these stories constantly. The Jewish people lived door by door, babysat each other's children, helped each other. We were able to coexist without any question. It's like ridiculous. It's like saying, in New York we can coexist with our Christian neighbors. I can prove it to you. I mean, everybody says, well, you don't have to prove it to me. We know that. This is how our existence was in the Muslim countries. And we teach our children that. We all know that. And we're required to show our thankfulness. So Zionism comes, and because of their selfish political movement, they have to come along with this concept, this false, selfish, evil concept that there's an ingrained hate from the Arabs and the Muslims to the Jewish people. And it's sold. It sells around the world. That, of course, has repercussions. What's the repercussions? Well, even when Muslim society started in new areas in the United States and other places, they looked at it with mistrust, because the Zionists who create the history say that, well, these new neighbors in your area, they're dangerous. You can't live with them, you can't coexist with them. So many other areas has repercussions. But we'll tell you what the truth is. That Zionism, if anything, they're the greatest factory of exacerbating anti-Semitism throughout the world. That is a fact. There's over 1 billion Muslim people in the world. We were living in every Muslim country. Step back and ask yourself, where is all these Jewish communities? Why can't they be a thriving community? What changed? What changed in Palestine that we can't coexist? I give a lot of times a parable. A guy went to a doctor, and he's reeking. He's reeking from cigarette smoke. He's coughing, and he's reeking. And he goes to the doctor, he's coughing, he says, "Doctor, I have a problem." He said, "What's the problem?" He said, "He's coughing, I can't breathe, I'm wheezing." And he said, I know that I'm allergic to my neighbor's roses." He says, "How do you know you're allergic to your neighbor's?" He says, "Well, my neighbor's looking, he has a whole garden of roses, and I'm allergic, I need something, give me some medication, I must have medication." So, and the doctor starts opening the windows, he can't even stare next to this guy. He said, "Tell me something, how long does the neighbor doesn't have roses?" He said, "Well, he has to prefer 10 years. He says, "He's a fanatic for roses, he grows roses all the time." He said, "How long are you wheezing?" He said, "I'm wheezing the last half a year, it's terrible." And he said, "And how long are you smoking cigarettes?" A year and a half, because I'm nervous, I start smoking cigarettes." He said, "And again, how long are you wheezing? When did you have this problem?" "I don't know, the last half a year, I became allergic to this guy's roses." "And you're smoking again, a year. You're smoking day and night, you're a chain smoker." He says, "Listen, doctor, you're a doctor, you prescribe medicine. I didn't come to speak philosophy with me. I'm allergic to my neighbor's roses and give me medication. I'm paying you for it." So everybody understands that this is ridiculous. We have the same problem. Zionism comes along and bangs on the table, decrees that anybody who speaks up against them is not because they're against this movement of Zionism. That's just a cover-up. You're an anti-Semite. The Muslim people are anti-Semites. They hate the Jews. It's an ingrained hate. Don't try to differentiate or separate the two. It's really just a simple cover-up. And if somebody gets up there and speaks about Zionism or any other comments, he's an anti-Semite. The Arab people have an ingrained hate for us. So people ask the question, tell me something, how many years have Jews been living together in Palestine, in Arab lands? Hundreds and hundreds of years. We've been coexisting. We've been slaughtered in Palestine? No. I can bring you my colleagues who lived in Jerusalem, not only to 100 years ago, but in 70, 80, when the tension was taut, with a spark, it could have ignited the whole issue there in Jerusalem. And yet they were living door by door and helping each other. I have older rabbis and older Arabs who will testify, but the Arabs aren't to be believed. Older rabbis, older people. And yet they lived together. And what happened? What changed? There's a new neighbor in the block. The Zionists. Zionism came along, and all of a sudden, we can't coexist. So what changed? The Quran changed? The Bible changed? The Jewish law changed? What changed? One issue, a political movement called Zionist, where rabbis around the world, we just put out a publication in English, from every leading rabbi, from Brisk to the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisroel Dovid, the names that to Jewish people means everything. The leaders of Jews, everyone spoke with the most vehement attack on Zionism, claiming that this is our downfall, our worst cancer for Jewish people. This is our tragedy. They warned us. This is a rebellion against God. That this is the downfall. This is what came about. It's a new thing. And yet these insist, no, we are the representatives of the Jewish people, and they have the mic. Thank God I have the mic now. But they have the mic in their hands for the last 60 years. Nobody can dare speak up against them. They get attacked viciously, physically, emotionally, any other manner, and become anti-Semitic. They become reckoned. Their voices are nil. They don't count anymore. And this is the attack on anybody who speaks up against Zionism. So in the United Nations, when they want to speak about a resolution about Zionism, we can't. Why not? Because what? Because what? By Durban 1, I was standing, it was 2 weeks, and the Zionists didn't realize what was going to happen there. So they were there at the beginning, and there was a big discussion about Zionism. And then they boycotted it. They walked out, the Zionists. And one of the most respected people from BBC actually, he was from a different order. He was one of the most respected writers today. And he told me, you know what I said to you? The reason that they don't want to discuss this is because the question will arise, is it a Jewish state or democracy? What's going on here? What do you call it? And they can't discuss it. They can't discuss any of this. He says, so therefore they boycott it, and they just threaten people, and they intimidate, because they can't discuss this issue. We say, discuss it. Now they're coming in, they use Judaism. Subconsciously, they intimidate with God, the fear of God. That is a fact. The fact is that if they're irreligious, why do they have to use the Jewish symbols? Where do they come together? If they're irreligious, how come they pick Uganda all of a sudden to the God's redemption? Where does it go? It's full of contradictions. They created a state, supposedly the Jewish state, God's miracle to us of finally being redeemed. Like they put it in this slow emotional music when they advertise about the state of Israel. And then they create a state, and we had a Torah given by God. The Torah is a law system that was given to us, it's exacting, and we've been using it for thousands of years. When we have any problem, whether it's about life, living, or it has to do with business matters, we're required, according to God, to go to this law system. Yet when they created their state, they created a secular law system. And that is considered blasphemy according to the Torah. To go to law system, in other words, you're saying God's Torah is not competent, is not good. And they created that's clearly spelled out in the Torah, that's considered blasphemy. So they created a secular law system, but that wasn't good. You have to understand that these guys are hypocrites, and not only they're con artists. So they needed to have this legitimacy, again, to be able to sell to the world that the God's dream there, and that their voice is the voice of God. So they created a rabbinate and a chief rabbi. Just for window dressing, and in order that he should be able to give an edict that you're allowed to cut down all the trees of the Arabs and take over the land or whatever, or they decided to create against the Jewish people, which is a whole other issue, how much the Jewish people who are religious suffer under the Zionists over there. But they decided that they're going to have a highway called Highway 6, Kabush 6, and they decided to make an extension on that highway. And it would run right through a Jewish cemetery, which is forbidden to dig up a Jewish cemetery. It's forbidden because we consider that there's godliness in a person even after he dies, and there's holiness, but the Zionists have no issue with holiness or godliness. So they decided they're going to make this extension right through the cemetery. But you can't do it. But that's not a problem. They go to their chief rabbi, signs a paper, it's kosher. Now you can do it. And this is what they do constantly. And the Jewish people went out and stood in the holes of the tractors and they were beaten mercilessly. We have pictures of constant demonstrations against the state. Every year we go out there and demonstrate. And we have pictures on our site, www.nkusa.org, and links. You can see how Jews are mercilessly beaten, day and night, constantly, arrested, beaten. And it's all there to see, but unfortunately the media can't speak about it, because Zionists, one thing you can't accuse them of not being efficient. They're very efficient. They have AIPAC to threaten any political voice who decides to speak up and show if they have anybody who decides to speak up against Zionism or show too much sympathy for the Palestinian people is committing political suicide. There's a book called Paul Finley wrote a book. Escapes my mind, somebody remembers the name.
They have to speak out.
They have to speak out, yeah. And he's just one voice. In Atlanta, there were two people just recently also spoke up, and they lost the elections the next time around. There's a book called, just in fact, to give an idea how they worked, they manipulated, they're called Ben Gurion scandals. They went to synagogues, and we have many people came to us and bore testimony to this. They went to Jewish areas in the Sephardic lands, and they created panic that the Jews should run away from those areas. They put bombs in synagogues and were caught with it. Just recently, and you can think, again, this is all documented. There's a guy, again, his name is Giladi, he lives in New York, he's still alive, we videotaped him, he wrote a book called Ben Gurion Scandals. He joined the Zionist movement, and they put bombs on the synagogues in order that the Jews should run away in panic, thinking that the Arab neighbors wanted to throw them out. It happened in Yemen. They emptied out the whole of Yemen. And what happened to these Jewish communities? Don't think that they went up and they were 2,000 years of religious Jewish communities. Don't think they went to Palestine and became religious and remained religious. Almost all lost their Jewish identity. And this is their way, their system. Just there's an article in Haaretz, Friday, August 22nd, 08. Binyamin Gibli, MI head, died at 89. Who was this person? He was the head of military intelligence during the failed Israeli sabotage operation in Egypt in 1954. The failed plan was the Levant affair, embroiled the government in international scandal. Gibli was one of the masterminds behind the operation aimed at swaying Western governments into a more favorable stance towards Israel. According to the plan, operators would carry out attacks on Western targets in Egypt to ruin ties with Cairo. This is a system of working. They create havoc, they create things and blame it on the Arabs. So this is what they did in Jewish communities. Nobody denies this. This was a fact. They were caught with this. He just died. Nobody, of course, it just passed over. He died and they talked about it and finished. This is things that they constantly did. They did it in Yemen. We had people came from Yemen. They lived in New York. They went back to Yemen for a wedding, and they were telling us they met with the sheikh, and the sheikh said, "You must come to my house. I'm going to try to be quick with this." He said, "Come to my house, and you must eat by me." They said, "We can't. We only eat kosher." And he insisted, "You have to come visit." When they came to his house, he said, "I want to tell you a story." He said, "My father was the sheikh in the 1950s of this whole area, and the Jews were living here for 2,000 years." He said, and all of a sudden some agents came from the Zionist movement, and they offered my father a bundle of money, a large amount of money that he should throw out the Jews. And my father said, "God forbid. How can I do that? You know, they're living amongst us, they're our friends, our neighbors, and so forth." So he said, within a month, within a month, 2 Jews were stabbed to death on the streets over there. And the Jews panicked, they ran away. Who did it? This is a Zionist, one of just the many, many issues. Of course, they were able to ensnare. They went there and they called Operation of the Wings of Eagles. And we say that God is going to redeem us on Kanfei Nesharim, on the wings of eagles. In Yemen, they never saw an airplane in their lives. I mean, when I was there 15, 20 years ago, they didn't have electricity in the place where we went. They had a generator for a few hours. Excuse me, they didn't have a bathroom. They didn't have, it's like, it's really backward over there, the whole system. And they never saw an airplane. So all of a sudden they came on these airplanes, And they said, look, this is the prophecy that's coming on the wings of the Operation Wings of Eagles. And they were able to get these people to join them to go up to Palestine. What happened to all this community? What happened in USSR? Which is, for us, it happens to be a point of encouragement, because people say, look, it's etched in a stone, the state of Israel. It's not going to disappear. You're a dreamer. What can you do? The fact is a fact. It's here today. So we say, look, 70 years, the USSR was quite a powerful regime. Nobody would have dreamed. You could have made a fortune if you would have bet against somebody a day before it disappeared. You could have been a multi-millionaire today, if whatever $1 million is worth. But you could have been rich. And why? Because nobody could dream it's going to disappear. And yet, you know, there's the Greeks and Romans, and things disappear overnight. It's nothing, you know, is etched in stone. There's a dawn on this world. That's it. And it says anything that's a rebellion, it says, why are you going against the words of God? It will not be successful. So the concept that you think that the state of Israel will be forever, we say that it will not be. It's because it's a rebellion against God in every aspect. And the state... Now, it happens to be that the USSR disappeared. What happened? Now, I dealt with the Jews from USSR. We dealt with the Jews while they were there. And these Jews were thirsty and hungry for their parents' religion. It was 70 years. 70 years means grandchildren, great-grandchildren. They didn't know what it meant to be Jew, but they wanted to know to be Jewish. They had no idea. They didn't know it was forbidden. In fact, we went to visit them. I went to visit a Jewish family. They were in Toronto. And we went to visit them. A grandfather, a father, and a son circumcised themselves in that week, because they couldn't do it in the USSR. And we went to visit them. They were sick. And they were smoking cigarettes right in our faces on the Sabbath, which is totally forbidden. And they didn't do it because they didn't know. They had no idea what it means to be a Jew, yet they knew circumcision. Yet these Jews now, they wanted to leave. Hundreds of thousands of these Jews want Judaism. So, and now comes the state of Israel. They, with my identity, with the Jewish identity, they go there. We are what God's doing. We are Judaism. Come, join us. They need cannon fodder. They need these people. They need to make sure that the populace, the majority is Jewish, or at least not Arab. So they take everybody up from the USSR, and these Jews, who, to us, like I say, it's rather to die than to lose your religion. That's what it's about. We believe God rules this world, and He requires us to serve Him. So they take all these Jews who are finally given the opportunity to uphold their covenant, and they have no idea what their covenant is. And the Israelis take them, the state of Israel takes them, puts them in their school system. They learn the Maccabees are some militants. King David was a militant, and Zionism is the pinnacle, is the final dream of redemption of God. And you can do what you want as long as you support this expelling of the Arab and Palestinian people, keeping the state of Israel. This is what they became. What could be worse for the Jewish people? We're talking about hundreds of thousands of Jewish people. It is our greatest catastrophe for the Jewish people. Now, I'm talking selfishly. I'm not talking about what they're doing to the Palestinian people. I'm talking about the rebellion against God in the concept of Judaism of itself. We're not talking about what they're doing to the Palestinian people. Understand what this is. It's rebellion against God. Who are the greatest supporters? Look at it. Measure it yourself. The more modern, the more supportive of Zionism. The more religious, the less supportive of Zionism. In fact, the portrayal is that your religion is Zionism, and the more religious you are more great Zionist. But the fact on the ground is not like that. We invite you. Come to New York. Go to Jerusalem. Look at the Yom HaTzmaos, the Zionist parade in Manhattan. See how many people with beards you'll find there. So many religious people. Because the fact is, although they have the mic in their hands, and the world believes what they say, the fact is just the opposite. The more religious, the more anti-Zionist, because Zionism is antithetical to Judaism. It's the diametric opposite. It's a rebellion against God and the Torah. And everything it's doing to the Palestinian people is not in the name of God. It's because it's rebellion against God. And if you take God out of the equation, what is your moral ruler? What is going to tell you what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do? Why do they have settlers who are ready to die, and the children are dying because they're standing in a position, obviously they're inciting their neighbors, and we're not trying to condone in any manner the violence that's happening. But they're putting people's lives, people are dying. Since the state of Israel was there, and even before that, there's endless, as far as your eye can see, cemeteries and of Israeli soldiers and Jewish people who died because of the state of Israel. Where in the Torah does it say you're allowed to give one life for the peace of the land? Where does it say that? Where do they have the right that people should die for a cause, for this cause? All the rabbinical authorities said that this is forbidden. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's forbidden in every part of it. And yet they do this. Why? Because it's an idol, Zionism. They're ready to sacrifice anything and everything on the on the altar of Zionism in order to accomplish their dream and their goal. And they don't have any God to morally tell them what they're allowed to do or not. This last year they made an international parade for the gay rights, for gay and lesbians, in the center of Jerusalem. Can you explain that? Here they're supposed to be the Jewish state, and what they could have gone to Tel Aviv. I mean, they wanted to make a statement. Go to Tel Aviv where you belong. No, but it had to be in, and they condemned the Jewish people for the intolerance. They said, how can you be so intolerant? Why don't you let these people march in the area? Why don't you feel for other people? Nobody asked the question, how intolerant the gay and lesbians are with the Israeli government. Why do they have to come in the middle of Jerusalem? That's exactly, on the whole planet Earth, they couldn't find a place that they have to march, only over there, because it's how they manipulate the minds of people. And they have the power in their hands, and they get endless amounts of money from Western governments, because the works of Satan, that they are that everything they do is condoned and is right. So Palestinian people go and they plead in the United Nations, hear our voices, so that whatever they're given is considered a present. We say, returning the land to the Palestinian people is not a present. It's returning what you were obligated to return. We say, according to the Torah, that there has to be a total dismantlement, according to the Torah clearly, without any questions. There has to be a total dismantlement entirely of the state of Israel. The return to the self-rule, respect of the Palestinian people over their land, including our Quds, and including every part of it. There's no right, any legitimacy whatsoever in this concept of Zionism in this state. It's clear. And people may ask, well, we're talking now, because in and of itself, to speak the truth, to understand the truth, is very important. So when people want to speak up and they want to discuss the concept of Zionism, they shouldn't be intimidated and fearful that they'll be condemned as anti-Semitic. They have to hear the truth, what it's entailing. They have to look at our writings, historic documents. I'll just quote one document here. There's one I'll just mention, that in the 1920s, the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, nothing to do with the rabbinate of the Zionists, the Farsi, but the chief rabbi of Jerusalem was Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld of blessed memory. And he went to visit King Hussein of the Hejaz, the grandfather, whatever, King Abdullah of Jordan. And he went with Dr. Rabbi Yisroel Dovid with a delegation to show their loyalty. And you can see on our site a whole message. He said the name of the God, the high Lord of heaven and earth. We feel honest to understand before His Majesty, as representatives of the World Jewish Organization, United Against Zionism in the holy city of Jerusalem. United Against Zionism organization, which accounts approximately 1 million registered members. It speaks to even a greater number. Basically, showing our loyalty, and you should know that we're the Jewish community. Dr. Dahan, who was an extremely capable person. He was a repentant Jew from Denmark. The whole story about him, he thought to be a good Jew, to become a Zionist, so he moved to Palestine. When he realized that the religious community is opposed to Zionism, he joined this Rabbi Sonnenfeld, and he became his messenger, his delegate to be able to speak to the people of the world. And he said, I'm going to go and present the real Jewish view of what's going on. So the Zionists, the Haganah, shot him in Jerusalem in the streets and killed him. They warned him they're going to kill him, and they killed him in the streets, and it's their own records. You can check the Dr. Yisroel Dovid Weiss, you can look that up. So basically, then later, in 1947, 1 year prior to the ratification of the State of Israel, the United Nations sent a delegation to Palestine to ask every community exactly what they wanted. Obviously, when they sent to the Muslim country, I'm sure they said we'd be elated to have Israel created and take over the whole land. I wasn't there, but I don't know, but presume. Christian Christianity most probably also, obviously, and the Jewish community, I'm quoting a letter that he wrote to the United Nations in July 16, 1947. Chief Rabbi of Jerusalem, Rabbi Yosef Dushinsky of blessed memory. He wrote, "We furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine." 3 months later, in document number AAC, it's the UN document 1447, November 18, 1947, he saw that they're being totally ignored. Why? Because Chaim Weizmann, and these guys, these pig eaters from the West, from Europe, decided, they're the representatives of Jews. They're representatives of the Jewish people. And they said we have to have a Jewish state, God's redemption. So he turned, in 1940, November, he saw that it's imminent, they're going to create a state. So he wrote a letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations in late success. And he wrote, "The Jewish Orthodox community, Eida Haredis of Jerusalem, comprising 60,000 souls, objects to the plea of including Jerusalem in the Jewish state and its residents becoming automatically citizens of the Jewish state. Our community demands that Jerusalem be an international zone under your protection with full autonomy and its residents be free citizens of the international zone of Jerusalem." He said, "I beg you, you're ignoring us. You don't want to listen to the Jewish community. At least leave Jerusalem." This was the voice of the Jewish people. The indigenous population of Palestine, they're still there, by the way, today, and they don't recognize the state of Israel. Jewish people have always, we are frustrated. We want the world to know that what the Zionists are doing, they're not doing in our name, that they have no right to speak in the name of Judaism. Even if the whole world would have become Jews Zionists, it still cannot, it's antithetical to Judaism. But the fact is, thank God, that hundreds of thousands of Jews from the religious community, besides the human rights activists from the non-religious community, we are all opposed to what they're doing. We feel the suffering of the Palestinian people. Now, this is just to understand the concept, and you have to speak up. We cannot accomplish. Only God can accomplish. We have what we're required to do, God accomplishments. We give the example of USSR that people should take heart. We give the example of the Zionists keep on putting fear-mongering into the Jewish people, even some religious people. They say, because there are religious people, the majority of religious Jews don't support the state and the concept of Zionism. And the proof is that the majority of religious Jews don't send their children to the army, even the ones who participate in the government there. They participate because they have to have representation in the government, but they won't send their children to the army, and they don't have Israeli flags. Yet, they don't want to return land to the Arabs. Again, we're not condoning that in any manner, but they say because they're fearful, because of Zionist propaganda, the Arabs want to kill every Jew. The fact is, of course, this is, again, Zionist propaganda. But whatever it is, you should understand that this whole issue is false to Judaism, and the Jewish people the religious would celebrate the day the state would disappear, or if it wouldn't entail the spilling of Jewish blood like the Zionists portray it, it wouldn't. And the proof is because the history attests to the fact we're living in harmony. Again, we're reluctant to speak politics. We're just talking about the facts. The fact is that the Torah says it will not be successful. Something which is, 60 years of hawks and doves, all the different approaches, Oslo Accord, the Y Accords, A, B, C, D, E, F, G Accord, anything you want, everything, nothing works. And why doesn't it work? Every post, because it's a rebellion against God. This is a fact, and so the solution, understand, that's why it's not successful. Do we want to speak about a solution? People say that the Arabs want to kill the Jews. We always say, look at South Africa. South Africa, you saw that it was a terrible situation, there was racism, and yet it was able to be solved. How? They said it's impossible because blacks have destroyed all the whites. You see, it didn't happen like that. To understand, it's an example again from God that you don't have to buy what the popular voice is. There could be a solution. We're reluctant to say a solution. One thing we can tell you, knowing the Arab leadership, and we've met with every group, they're not out for Jewish blood. That's false. And they're going to show you the Hamas charter. We know about the Hamas charter. The fact of the matter is, the charter was implemented, whatever one it was. All the leaders, they are clearly against the spilling of Jewish blood. They want their self-respect, their self-rule over the land that's properly theirs. And we support them with that. And we say that if you will approach them, instead of just throwing them a bone, here, I'm giving you West Bank, I'm giving you Gaza with this condition, with that condition, and all the baloney, if you would approach them and you would say, with God's help, we profusely apologize because we've stolen your land. And we have to think about restitution and how to and it would cost billions of dollars, whatever it would take. It would be a slow process. they would put out, issue a fatwa that there shouldn't be one drop of Jewish blood spilled. You have to think about it. This is a fact because we've been coexisting. You will say it will cost billions of dollars, and I'm going to end with this, of people, let's say, the Zionists who committed atrocities, interrogations. They'll say, I don't feel unsafe. I have to move to someplace else. You don't want to stay here? Fine. We'll help you. We'll give you money to move to some other country. So it costs how many billions of dollars? Whatever it is. How much does it cost to support the IDF every year? How many billions of dollars in a quagmire that just uses up more money and more money to build walls, to build this solution, to buy the most latest nuclear warheads, and to continually do what they're doing? There is a solution, and the solution is turn to the Torah, and you'll think logically it makes sense also. I mean, we don't have to come with this. We just say because it's God's command. So we all, around the Jewish community, today was a fast day for us. We prayed fervently to God, and we urge everybody. Ultimately, who's the one who brings the results? God. So we should all pray for the speedy and peaceful dismantlement of this rebellion against God, this evil embodiment, and so there should be self-rule for the Palestinian people, so we could coexist once again, Jews, Muslims, and Christians together. And ultimately, we pray for the day when all humanity will recognize the one God and we will rejoice in the service of God together. Thank you.